Welcome to Our Weird World. I'm your host, John Henson, who did not just get done recording the previous episode. I did it like 30 minutes ago. It's fine. It's fine. This is what I have to do now. I don't know why I even said that. This week, we are talking about some people who just regular everyday life was too boring for them. And so they decided to strike out on their own and get into some crazy adventures. And so we are going to look at the stories of Douglas Mawson, the Robertson family, Ernest Shackleton, and our first story after our fancy music of Alexander Selkirk. So you remember Daniel Defoe's novel Robinson Crusoe, this story of a perpetually shipwrecked guy who winds up on a deserted island and then basically creates a society from scratch before finally ended up getting rescued? Well, Defoe was not some brilliantly creative writer who thought up of Robinson Crusoe out of nowhere, right? Like, Crusoe was based on a real person, although in my opinion, the real story is way crazier than what might have happened in the book. So it starts back in 1704 when Alexander Selkirk was the sailing master for Captain Thomas Stradling on the Cinque Ports, was this merchant ship. And so after Captain Stradling docked the ship on an uninhabited island in the Juan Fernandez archipelago, which is about 400 miles off the coast of Chile, to restock on fresh water and other supplies, Selkirk was, he was looking around the ship, and like, he had been working on ships since he was like a really little kid. And he felt strongly that the Cinque Ports was not in good enough shape to keep going. Like, there were a lot of things that needed to be repaired, and he didn't feel like they were going to make it to the next port. So Selkirk insisted that the crew needed to make the repairs before they headed back out to sea. And then when Captain Stradling refused, Selkirk said that he would rather stay on the uninhabited island than go back out into the Pacific Ocean with a leaky ship. And so, as hardened ship captains tend to do, Stradling accepted Selkirk's offer and left him on the island with a musket, a hatchet, a knife, a pot, a Bible, and some clothes, because I don't know, maybe he just didn't understand sarcasm, or he just didn't feel like dealing with Selkirk's crap. Ironically, or not, the Cinque Ports eventually sank off the coast of Colombia, and the crew was ultimately captured by the Spanish. Well, back on the island here, Selkirk spent his first few days along the coast eating spiny lobsters and helplessly scanning the horizon for another ship to come and pick him up. When hundreds of sea lions invaded his beach for mating season, he moved inland a little bit and quickly found that things were actually a lot better than life on the shore. He came upon a flock of feral goats, which were actually the descendants of goats that had been left by earlier sailors who had come onto the island. And so he started using them for milk and meat. He then harvested wild turnips, cabbage, and pepper berries. I don't know what a pepper berry is, from the soil. His only problem, aside from being completely alone on an uninhabited island, were the infestation of rats that would constantly try to bite his toes whenever he slept at night. And so Selkirk ended up solving that problem by training an army of feral cats that had also been left on the island to keep watch at night and control the rat population. And all of this sounds insane, but it's not. He is legitimately it's a lot of good fortune, right? It wasn't that it was like this island had been known to the trading ships along the way. And so a lot of ships ended up stopping here. Even though it was uninhabited, there was a ton of resources there for people to restock and all of that. And so ships along the way, dropped items off or whatever, for whatever reason. And so there's goats and cats and unfortunately rats, but then there's also these other natural resources. And so Selkirk just has all of this at his disposal. And, he's got his goat farm going now, and now he's building up this army of cats to combat the rat population. to keep from, getting bitten and sick. Selkirk then forged a knife out of old barrel rings that he found on the beach, and he built 2 huts. He built one for cooking and then one for sleeping, and he built these out of pepper trees, which I didn't even know that pepper grew on trees. Probably like peppercorns, but then I had, honestly, guys, I had no idea where peppercorns come from, so that might be it. I thought peppercorns may have come from like grew out like a weed or something. I don't know. I know peppers, like bell peppers and habaneros and all that, they grow in the ground. They're vegetables. I don't know what a pepper tree is, but now I'm curious and I kind of want one. Either way, when he ran out of gunpowder to shoot his food, he then honed his ability to chase wild goats down on foot and then bludgeon them to death. So now he's like full on feral. After over 4 years stranded on the island, all right, he's like straight up castaway territory at this point. An English ship landed on the island and took Selkirk aboard. The ship's captain was so impressed by Selkirk's tenacity that he made him the second mate of the ship immediately, and then later placed him in command of another ship. But rather than returning home to Scotland, Selkirk continued his life on the seas, leading raids and expeditions for the British along the South American coast. But this dude, straight up like castaway, just built up an army of cats, started just chasing down goats like he's a lion man, and then beating them to death so he can continue to eat. It's just crazy. Our next story here is of Ernest Shackleton, who was born on February 15th, 1874 in Kilkea, Ireland. I'm Kilkea. I should know this. I'm Irish. Anyway, while the family bounced around the country due to his father's job, changing job all the time, Shackleton struggled to pay attention in school. He was just not into it. There was never really any stability. And because of his disinterest, he was actually allowed to drop out of school at age 16 to take an apprenticeship on a boat. And for the next 4 years, Shackleton traveled around the world, learning how to run a ship and interacting with various cultures, meeting new people along the way. When the Boer War started in 1899, Shackleton was transferred to a troop transport ship where he met Cedric Longstaff, whose father was in the middle of financing the National Antarctic Expedition. The Boer War, I think, if I'm not mistaken, was down in like South Africa. I think it was in Africa for some reason. I don't know what they were. It's one of those dumb like European wars that was constantly going on. It's not really important. Shackleton and Cedric Longstaff got along really well, which allowed Shackleton to get a job on this expedition organizing the crew's entertainment. Shackleton's ship, the Discovery, departed England on July 31st, 1901, and then arrived in Antarctica on January 8th, 1902, after some stops in Cape Town, South Africa, and also New Zealand, which I don't know what kind of routing you're taking, but your maps are wrong. If you're going from England to South Africa to New Zealand to Antarctica, that's wrong. That's so wrong. You just leave England, you just go south and you'll get to Antarctica eventually. I mean, okay, if we're going to be technical, you got to go around France and Spain and kind of the eastern kind of side or the western side of Africa, but you'll get there eventually. You keep going down. You don't have to follow south or the coast of Africa and then turn east and keep going. It's just wrong. It's very wrong. I don't know what they were doing. Although Shackleton had no scientific or military experience, he participated in experiments that the crew was doing and helped establish a safe route to the Great Ice Barrier, which is actually the giant ice wall that encircles our flat Earth. Believe it! It's true, you guys. It's not. Don't believe that. Anyway, on November 2nd, 1902, Shackleton was chosen to accompany Robert Falcon Scott, the expedition leader, and scientist Edward Adrian Wilson on a march to achieve the highest possible latitude in the general direction of the South Pole. Although the group broke the previously achieved record, their dogs got sick along the way, and actually 22 dogs died in this process. The men also suffered from frostbite and scurvy, with Shackleton in particular actually barely even making it back. Like, everyone got so sick. Shackleton was eventually sent back to regular civilization, where he spent the next 4 years living in various cities and working various jobs. He married a woman named Emily Dorman, and the two had 3 children. But in 1907, Shackleton realized that going to Antarctica was kind of the only thing that ever really interested him. It was the only thing he really cared about, the only thing that excited him. And so he made a pitch to the Royal Geographical Society to conquer both the geographical and magnetic South Poles. It's because that was a thing that was important back then. And after receiving enough donations to fund the trip, his new ship, the Nimrod, set off on January 1st, 1908. And on that ship was a guy named Douglas Mawson. And Mawson, once the Nimrod expedition had finished up, and we'll get back to Shackleton's story here in a minute, but once the Nimrod expedition had finished up, Mawson stayed behind in Antarctica for a couple more years. He did return to England in 1910, but Mawson decided that the frozen wasteland of Antarctica was much more agreeable to him, and he ended up creating the Australasian Antarctic Expedition to explore a region of Antarctica that had not yet been explored. And just for the heck of it, he also planned to visit the South Magnetic Pole. So Mawson's crew landed at Cape Denison in Commonwealth Bay in Antarctica on January 8, 1912, and established their first home base. The crew spent the winter in an unrelenting blizzard because, Antarctica. And for the next few months, this is how crazy it is. Winds averaged 50 miles per hour and often gusted to nearly 200 miles per hour. So months, wind is constantly blowing and averaging 50 miles an hour. That's crazy. By November, the storm had finally let up. And so Mawson and 2 other men, Xavier Mertz and Belgrave Ninnis, left the base and headed east to survey the land that they had gone there to actually do. After 5 weeks of mapping the coastline and collecting geologic samples, the crew finally headed back to the base. But on the way back, with Mawson on his sled, Mertz skiing, and Ninnis jogging beside the sled, which got to be the worst job of the 3, a snow bridge actually collapsed under their weight, sending Ninnis falling into the newly exposed crevasse. It's crevasse. Yeah, crevice is like Crevice. This is crevasse. Along with Ninnis, the crew's 6 best dogs, their tent, and the rest of their rations all disappeared into this giant icy cavern. They're gone. After a brief memorial service for Ninnis, Mertz and Mawson then sledded for 27 hours straight. They only had about a week's worth of supplies left, which quickly ran out. They didn't have any dog food, and so they then just returned to the remaining dogs to use as food and to survive. As the 2 carried on, their physical condition got even worse. Both men suffered from dizziness and nausea. Their hair, nails, and skin began to fall off. Mertz eventually went insane, refusing to believe that he was suffering from frostbite. And so he, to try to prove it, he literally bit off his own pinky finger, which, if it's frostbitten, you're not going to feel that. He then began having seizures and ultimately died on January 8th, 1913, leaving Mawson to travel the remaining 100 miles back to base on his own. These guys were way far out because they were on this surveying expedition. And so they're mapping out Antarctica is huge. And so they're mapping out as much as they can, and then they're finally coming back. And so they're still a long way out. Another crevasse then opened up as Mawson was traveling back. But instead of falling completely through, Mawson's sled got wedged into the ice, a couple of feet down. And Mawson somehow found the strength to climb up the harness that was attached to the sled and pull himself out. So now he doesn't have a sled. He he just has whatever he was carrying at the time, but somehow finally makes it back to base, where you would think he would be immediately whisked away on a rescue ship. But that was not the case, because the ship that had been waiting for his crew to return had actually left the base a few hours before Mawson made it back because they assumed that he and the rest of the crew had died. So instead, Mawson was forced to wait 11 more months in Antarctica before the next ship could arrive. Before returning to his laboratory work at the base, Mawson did take time to send a telegram to his fiancée, clearly expecting her to be very angry or upset or devastated, considering what she might have thought had happened to him. But like when you've spent the previous 6 weeks on the brink of death, like you are kind of over it and not really in the mood to deal with whatever emotional problems a woman has. And so the telegram he sent to his wife just said, "Deeply regret delay, only just managed to reach Hut." And that was it. But he ended up surviving. He ended up making it back and everything came out okay. Back to Ernest Shackleton, though. After successfully discovering the South Magnetic Pole on the Nimrod expedition, Shackleton returned to the United Kingdom as a national hero. He was knighted by King Edward VII and promoted to Commander of the Royal Victorian Order, which probably means something important to British people. He then spent the next several years traveling and speaking about his time in Antarctica, but, talking about it that much, he really got the itch to go back. But this time, he wanted to cross the entire continent. So despite World War I going on, Shackleton departed England on the Endurance on August 8th, 1914. As the ship traveled through the Weddell Sea on the South American side of Antarctica in January 1915, the Endurance actually got stuck in an ice floe. And Shackleton, realizing that they were not going to thaw out and keep advancing until spring, he ordered the ship to go ahead and be converted to a winter station. When spring finally arrived, the ice began breaking, which then damaged the ship's hull. So now they really can't go anywhere because they don't really have the means to repair it. And then on October 24th, water finally broke through the hull and the ship began to sink, finally slipping beneath the surface nearly a month later. And so for the next 2 months, the team basically camped out on a large ice floe, like a giant iceberg, essentially, hoping that it would just drift back to Paulet Island in Antarctica, which was conveniently 250 miles away. However, it kind of did. By March, the ice floe was within 60 miles of the island, but had run into a larger, much more impassable chunk of ice that had broken away from Antarctica. So with no other option, Shackleton ordered everyone into the lifeboats they had saved and directed them to head to the nearest land. I don't know how he knows where that's going to be, but whatever. 5 days later, they arrived on Elephant Island after not having been on actual dry land for nearly 500 days. Like they had been on ice for the last 500 days, or a boat, which is crazy. The group's chances of being rescued by some other ship were practically zero. So Shackleton grabbed 5 men and spent the next 2 weeks floating over 700 miles to the South Georgia whaling stations. And South Georgia, kind of, if I'm not mistaken, it's in the South Atlantic, kind of close-ish, as close as you can be, in the middle of the ocean to like Argentina. And it was just like one of those places where, the British and some other European countries, I think, had kind of established an outpost for whaling operations. The only problem for Shackleton was that the whaling stations were on the other side of the island where they landed, and it was blocked by rough mountainous terrain. But despite the challenge, Shackleton and his men made the overland journey, where they immediately began trying to figure out how to rescue the rest of the group that was back 700 miles away on Elephant Island. They made 3 attempts to get back there, but it was all foiled by sea ice that kept getting in their way. But then eventually 2 ships arrived on the island to rescue the remaining 22 men. Shackleton eventually returned to England in May 1917 and volunteered to actually join the army to fight in World War I, despite not being in any kind of shape to do so. Like, he's been out on the sea for years and he's not properly nourished or anything like that. But Instead, he served as a diplomat to Chile and Argentina. He also performed various missions in the Arctic region and Russia. And then Shackleton was discharged in 1919 with a rank of major. He then spent the next year lecturing, but quickly got tired of it again, probably because it wasn't cold enough, and began looking at more expedition opportunities. On September 24th, 1921, Shackleton departed England for another Antarctic expedition. But when the ship arrived in Rio de Janeiro to resupply, Shackleton suffered a heart attack, thanks mostly to the heavy drinking he'd been doing for the last several years. However, he refused any sort of medical attention and like really insisted that the expedition keep going. And so the ship continued on to South Georgia, eventually arriving on January 4th, 1922. But the next morning, Shackleton had another heart attack and died. So, and just dude spent his entire life mostly just going back and forth to Antarctica on ship, which was way slower than flying. I mean, it still, I think, probably takes a couple of days to get there now, just with all the flights that you have to take, but better than months. Our final story here begins in January of 1971 when Neil Robertson asked his father why the family couldn't just go sailing around the world. Neil's father, Dougal, sat the boy down and taught Neil about responsibilities and how the adult world wasn't just this big game that children could play, and that they had to have a job and they had, these obligations and all of that. And no, that's not at all what he had. Dougal actually thought that was a great idea and immediately sold the family's farm in Staffordshire, England, and bought a 43-foot boat called the Lucette. The rest of the family, which included Dougal's wife, Lynn, and 3 other kids, set sail out of England, apparently unaware that they had the choice to actually stay behind and live a normal life. They also didn't bother to check the weather, which would have told them that they were sailing right into a fierce winter storm. Because this is the 1970s. There's weather information out there now that can help with this. Despite that, the family survived the storm, and over 17 months later, the family had fully sailed across the Atlantic, picked up a hitchhiker named Robin Williams, not the famous one, dropped off their daughter Anne in the Bahamas for some reason, and then drifted around the tip of South America, and then gone back up the Pacific coast along the Chilean coastline. And I don't understand any of these decisions. One, how does it take you 17 months to sail across the Atlantic? The Titanic was going to do that in a few days. And I get it. The Titanic was probably going a lot faster, but I don't know. I mean, maybe they were just trying to rely on the winds and eventually finally got the right, current to go do that. But then also picking up Robin Williams, that's hilarious to me. And the timeline of Robin Williams' life, the actual Robin Williams, if you really want to get into a conspiracy, this is it. Because Robin Williams didn't really start getting into comedy or acting or anything like that until 1976. And so this is around 1971. And I don't know, man. It's possible. How crazy would it be? And also, where did they pick him up at? Maybe it's in Bermudas. It was oh, hey, I don't know. My Robin Williams impression is awful, but that would also get really annoying, right? It's just, you're on a boat with Robin Williams and he just doesn't shut up. And I'm not going to do the Robin Williams impression because I'm self-conscious of it right now because it wasn't great. And I don't know. And maybe that's what it was. Maybe Anne got so tired of it that she was literally I hate you guys. Leave me in the Bahamas. Good luck doing whatever else. And how do you, these are the worst parents ever, right? It's one, you listen to your dumb little kid and be like, Dad, let's just leave everything and sail around the world. That's a great idea, son. I'm going to do that. And then the daughter's just I hate you guys. Please leave me forever. And then they just do it. I don't know. It's just crazy. So they're headed up the Pacific coast. They get near, when they get near the Galapagos Islands, one of the boys actually heard a splashing sound coming from behind their boat, which turned out to be a pod of killer whales coming right for them. Douglas Robertson, who was 17 at the time, immediately thought like this is how he was going to die. He thought he was going to be eaten alive. He thought these whales were going to attack them. And they did. The whales literally attacked the boat, sank it. And in the chaos of the Lucette sinking, everyone climbed aboard the boat's inflatable rubber dinghy, the Edna Mare. They also were able to salvage 10 days worth of water, a bag of onions, some oranges and lemons, and some candy, which was not nearly enough for a group of 6 people. But somehow the boat and the supplies were able to last for 17 days before the inflatable part of the Edna Mare gave out. And then because this boat wasn't even built to hold 6 people, it started taking on water, leaving only one wooden bench above water that everyone took turns sitting on to avoid just stewing in waist-deep, stagnating water. Along the way, the family fashioned a spear out of one of the boat's wooden paddles. They actually killed 13 turtles and a 5-foot shark, drinking their blood and rationing the meat. The problem, though, was that they had run out of fresh water. Even worse, the water that had collected in the boat, that maybe from rainwater or anything like that, was mixed with turtle blood and other kinds of entrails from the animals that they had killed. So, like, you can't drink that. Lynn, who was the mother, she had given up a nurse's income to go on this real stupid, awful adventure, knew that ingesting this gross salt water would kill everyone. So she began fashioning enemas out of the rungs on the boat's ladder and then jammed them in her family's butts. I'm not making this up. She literally did this. That's not a joke. I cannot stress to you how serious I'm being right now. She made enemas out of the rungs on the ladder of the boat and then surgically put them in all of her family's butts, and maybe Robin Williams' butt too. I don't know. Whoa! Why is it Barney Rubble? I don't have the laugh, because when you do an impression, you have to you start with a sound that they make, and then you can kind of go into how they talk. And for some reason, for me, I feel like I have to do a laugh to kind of get the tone and the pacing right for Robin Williams. But then when I do it, it just sounds like I'm a Flintstones character. So we're going to stop that. Anyway, there was a reason that she did this, because apparently, poisonous materials and hazardous materials don't get into your digestive system if it goes through your butt. And so the way she kept her family hydrated was with this gross, entrail laden seawater that they had in their boat that she then used the enemas for and just pumped them into her family's buttholes to keep them hydrated. And apparently that works. I didn't know. The guy on TikTok who was like, this is something I didn't know till I was in my 30s. This is a thing. Apparently, you don't get dehydrated if you shove salt water up your butt, and you don't get sick if you put a bunch of nasty material out there. Who knew? Who would have thought? Anyway, we're almost done here. On July 23rd, 1972, 38 days after losing the Lucette, a Japanese fishing boat spotted the family drifting around in the ocean. Lynn and Dougal actually later got divorced, citing the trauma from sharing a small boat for a month as the final straw. And yeah, I get it, right? Like, Lynn probably very upset at her husband for agreeing to go on this crazy adventure because of their kids. Dougal probably not super happy that his wife forced gross seawater up his butt to keep him alive. And so I completely get it. All right, some amazing adventurers in the books. Antarctica, and just basically what I'm learning, though, because the one thing that all these stories had in common was a lot going on in the southern hemisphere. And it seems like that's just not the place you want to be. I don't know what's going on down there. It seems like it's a pattern, right? Because the majority of the Earth's population lives in the northern hemisphere, right? All of it. Like, yeah, there's a lot more concentrated around the equator, but it's on the north side of the equator, right? Like a lot of, and granted, like that's where most of the land is also, but I don't know, man. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there's some silliness going on in the southern hemisphere that kills people or doesn't want people around. Anyway, let's recap and see what we learned today.
What did we learn?
Number one, Robinson Crusoe was inspired by the life of Alexander Selkirk, who lived for 4 years on a deserted, uninhabited island and made it work. Raised an army of cats and took out goats with his bare hands, and then ended up continuing to live a life on the seas. Number two, Douglas Mawson and Ernest Shackleton did a lot of Antarctic expeditions, thought it was super cool, thought that a barren white wasteland was the best place to live, and maybe that's where we send the neo-Nazis because they love white so much. That's it, dude. That's it. That's the answer. We spin it in a way that we make it seem like go to Antarctica, all right? You don't believe in climate change, but it'll eventually be habitable. But right now it's all white. It is pure. It is pure white. So go there. Not a Jew or a black person to be seen. All right. Go have fun. Build up your own nation. Go for it. And maybe that's what we do. Maybe we should look into that. Anyway, number three, in the 1970s, a family just up and left their life and bought a boat and just went sailing around the world, and it didn't go well. Who would have thought? A family full of inexperienced adventurers gets into some trouble. And also, apparently, you can shove just about anything in your butt and you won't get sick. Next week on Our Weird World, we are finally tackling a subject that multiple people have said, whoa, why didn't you do this one? We are talking about Jack the Ripper. Who was he? Well, we don't know, but I can tell you there are 3 people who it definitely was not. And that's really what we're going to be covering. 3 stories of people who terrorized London that were definitely not Jack the Ripper. We're looking at the stories of Whipping Tom, the London Monster, and Thomas Neal Cream. So, you know, look, I'm not gonna break a case wide open next week by any means, but we'll cover it and see what we can learn that way. Thank you all for continuing to listen. Keep telling all your friends, and oh God, don't, like, if you hate country music with the same passion I do, don't even keep listening to this episode after I sign off, because this is the most infuriating country song that I've ever come across. And last week's was enraging already. This week is probably the worst. So keep it weird. Hey, my girl is banging. She's so low maintenance. Don't need no champagne poppin' entertainment. Take her to Wendy's, can't keep her off me. She wanna dip me like them fries in her Frosty. But every now and then when I get paid, I gotta spoil my baby with an upgrade. Don't need no Tesla to impress her. My girl is happy rollin' on a Vespa. Don't need no mansion to get romancin'. She's super fine, double wide, slow dancin'. My new clean blue jeans without the holes in 'em. Country kisses on my lips without the skull in 'em. Yeah, she's probably gon' be keeping some Victoria's Secrets. Maybe a little Maybelline, but she don't need it. In the kitchen light, radio slows down. boxed wine, and her updo goes down. Yeah, we fancy like Applebee's on a date night. Got that Bourbon Street steak with the Oreo shake. Get some whipped cream on the top two. 2 straws, 1 check. Girl, I got you. Bougie like Natty in the styrofoam. Squeaking in the truck bed all the way home. Some Alabama jamma, she my Dixieland delight. That's how we do, fancy like. Oh,